Well, it's 57 AD, the 3 missionary trips are over, and Paul has collected a special offering that all the Christians in these other cities gave for the Jewish Christians down there in Jerusalem, the poor Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. So Paul's got a huge sack of money that he wants to deliver. But everybody is warning him, Paul, do not go to Jerusalem. Paul, whatever you do, do not go back to that city. In fact, Agabus the prophet stood up last week and gave a warning to Paul. Well, Paul's in Caesarea, the last stop before Jerusalem, and everybody's warning him. Even Dr. Luke is trying to persuade him, Paul, don't get on that road. Don't take that trip to Jerusalem. But it's Paul. He's ready. He senses this is what the Holy Spirit wants. And so, Paul sets off and is walking the 2-day trip from Caesarea to Jerusalem. He's on a road just like this one. And it won't be long before he reaches the capital city of Jews around the world, Jerusalem. Here she is. And the centerpiece of the city is the temple. But you guys know the Romans are in charge these days, and they got soldiers stationed all over. In fact, they built a fortress right inside the temple in the corner of it, and they store 1,000 troops there. And there's 2 flights of stairs. If anything crazy tries to happen, any riots or any crazy stuff, those soldiers march down those flights of stairs and they can be right there, ground level of the temple in no time. And stuff did come up in Jerusalem. And in fact, spoiler alert, something crazy is going to go down tonight. This is Jerusalem. This is the city where everything seems to go down. David ruled as king from this city. Jesus came and was killed in this city. And someday when Jesus comes back to set up his kingdom on earth for 1,000 years, guess what city he's going to rule from? Yep, right here in Jerusalem. It all goes down in Jerusalem. And in Paul's life, this was the city he grew up in. He followed the Mosaic law zealously right here in the city. All 613 laws. He followed them to the letter. And when Christianity started, he hated it. He harassed the Christians. He rounded them up, punished them. He had Stephen killed right here in this city. Stephen's blood soaked into the ground right here in Jerusalem. But then, Paul himself became a Christian. And everything changed. Totally changed. He ended up going on his first ever missionary trip, sharing the gospel with Jews in different cities, and they rejected it. So he turned and shared it with the Gentiles in these cities, and God worked powerfully, and all these Gentiles got saved in all these different cities of the empire. And now the huge question rose up, what do we teach these Gentiles? Do they have to keep these Mosaic laws too? Do they have to stay away from bacon and have these clothing laws, all 613? What do we teach them? Remember that question? And so Paul came back to the city of Jerusalem 7 years earlier, got all the Christian leaders together, and they decided to answer this question. They sought God, and by the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the leaders, including Peter and James, they made a decision. Gentiles do not need to obey the laws of Moses. They wrote it down in a letter, and Paul took it and brought it with him on missionary trip number 2 and trip number 3 and explained it to the Gentile Christians in these different cities. But guess what? Even though he wasn't under the Mosaic law anymore, Paul used sensitivity. When he was with Jewish people in these cities trying to explain to them about Jesus, and they were keeping the kosher food laws and staying away from bacon, you know what? Paul kept the laws with them. When he was in their homes and they served him kosher Jewish food, he ate kosher Jewish food. He didn't whip out a stick of bacon and be like, haha, I get to eat this, I don't have to keep... No, he showed respect. But then when he was in Gentile homes, and they had their normal Gentile food, including bacon and other foods, and they offered him that food, and he was there to try to explain the gospel with them, he ate that food. He would eat bacon. Whatever they were eating, he was eating. Paul's policy was this: I don't want anybody to trip over me. I want them to receive the gospel. So I don't care what I eat. It doesn't matter to me. I do everything I do to try to win people for the gospel and make sure I don't cause any hurdles, any stumbling blocks that don't need to be there. In fact, Paul explained that policy in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. He writes, "Even though I'm free and I don't belong to any man, I make myself a slave to anyone to win as many people as possible. To the Jews, I become like a Jew to win the Jews. And to Gentiles who don't have the law, I become like them. I do this to win them. I do everything I do for the sake of the gospel." So when Paul was with Jews, he kept the Mosaic law, but when he was with Gentiles, he lived like Gentiles. Why did he do this? All for the sake of the gospel. So Paul used sensitivity. But even trying to be as sensitive as he could be, sometimes conflict rose up. Especially when some Gentiles became a Christian and other Jews wanted to try to tell them they have to keep the laws of Moses. Well, Paul would step in and say, no, actually they don't. Jesus is enough for them. They don't need an insurance policy. They don't need to keep these laws. And so no matter how hard he tried, Paul got a reputation for being, quote, against the Mosaic law. And nowhere was that reputation stronger than in Jerusalem. The non-Christian Jews in Jerusalem already had hated Paul, but this just added fuel to the fire. They hated Paul so much in Jerusalem that if this was the Wild West, there would have been bounty posters all over the city with Paul's face on them. Wanted, dead or alive, $100 million, or berries. The non-Christian Jews here are just waiting for Paul to dare show his face in Jerusalem. And today, he's coming. Paul is walking on the road from Caesarea to Jerusalem. And once he gets to the city, it's not going to take long for things to heat up. So get ready, get set. This is Acts chapter 21 through 23. The showdown begins. One wild week in Jerusalem. So, we got to Jerusalem. Like I said last week, it was a 2 to 3 day walk, so a long walk, nice conditions. We got to the city. Everything was great at first. The Christians there welcomed us. They took us. We had a meeting with the leaders, with the elders, and of course, James. You guys remember James, right? He was one of the head leaders there with Peter. James was the brother of Jesus. So yeah, we got together with them, said hi. They said hi to us. And Paul just started giving them a report of all the stuff God had done on those 2 missionary trips, missionary trip 2 and 3, since the last time he had been there. And it was awesome. He was just sitting down there telling them, you know, I went to Athens, and you guys aren't going to believe it. There was like idols and statues all over the city to all these different gods. And I went there and I started telling them about Jesus and about how he came and how he's the one God picked. And some of them said I was crazy, but a bunch of them wanted to hear more, and a bunch of them ended up becoming Christians. So I stayed there a while, discipled them. Then I went next door to the sex capital city, which I know is probably a little tough for you guys to believe, but I went there. I felt like God was leading me there. I went to that city, and guess what? A bunch of those guys became Christians. So I stayed there for like a year and a half, discipled them. They got really strong. Then I went over on the next trip, I went to Ephesus. You guys know Ephesus, right? It's famous for the worship of Artemis. And I went there, you know, and it got a little heated, but a bunch of the people there believed too. And so I stayed 2 years there discipling them, and there's all these strong Christians now in all these different parts of the empire. God's just done amazing things. So everything was great. James and the other Christians there were all excited. They were like, that's awesome. They were praising God. But then they sat Paul down. They said, Paul, so now you know you're back here in Jerusalem, and that's great, all the great stuff God did in those other cities. But you know, you kind of have a bad reputation here in Jerusalem among some of the Jews. You know that. And you know things can get kind of volatile here in Jerusalem, right? And so we've got a request for you to help keep peace with some of these Jews that we're living alongside of that aren't Christians and that kind of frankly hate you. We got a request for you. Also, there's a bunch of new baby Christians from among the Jews that just became Christians, and a lot of them, they're still really enthusiastic about that Mosaic law, okay? It's still really important to them. You know how we were all raised, and they're really excited about that. And they've heard rumors, okay? Some of these baby Christians have heard rumors that you teach people against this book, that you say bad things about it, that you tell people not to circumcise their kids, that you even tell them not to follow some of our ancient customs and just to ignore that kind of stuff. Now, side note, guys, Paul's sitting here and they're telling him the reputation he's got. Was it true? Did Paul, was he against the Mosaic law? And was he against circumcision and all that stuff? Is that true or false? Well, it's kind of half true, but not entirely true, right? Paul did believe, as we had in the Acts chapter 15, circumcision and bacon, Paul did believe that when Jesus died on the cross, the new covenant started. And the Mosaic covenant and all those 613 laws, don't eat bacon, don't wear mixed fabric clothing, all 600, that covenant was deactivated the moment Jesus died. Paul believed that. And everywhere he went, he taught people, this covenant cannot save you. You need Jesus and the new covenant to save you. And that's true. He believed that no matter if you were Jewish or Gentile, this covenant could not save you. And he was clear about that. The only way to be justified, which means to be made right with God or saved, the only way to be saved is through faith in Christ Jesus, period. So there was absolutely no reason for new Gentiles who became Christians. There was no reason for them to. And if Jewish people became Christians and they understood that this was not mandatory anymore, but they still wanted to keep it because it was on their heart and their conscience that they didn't want to eat bacon just voluntarily. If they voluntarily wanted to keep the Mosaic covenant, Paul was fine with that. He said, you should do whatever your heart's telling you to do. I just don't think we should force this on people because it's not active anymore. And we definitely shouldn't think it saves us. Okay? So he wasn't really against it. He just didn't think it saved people and it wasn't mandatory anymore. How about circumcision? They said, we've heard rumors you're against circumcision. Was Paul against circumcision? Well, for Jewish people, absolutely not. Again, circumcision was around ever since this covenant was started, and it was mandatory. All Jewish boys were supposed to be circumcised because of the Abrahamic covenant, and that covenant is still active. So Paul believed in circumcision for Jews. In fact, he got Timothy circumcised on one of the trips, and he didn't even have to do that because Timothy was only half Jewish. So, of course, Paul's not against circumcision. Now, if people thought they needed to be circumcised to get saved, he'd be against that. But he wasn't against circumcision. So in summary, were the rumors true? Was Paul against the Mosaic law? No. And he certainly wasn't against circumcision for Jewish people. But you know how rumors are. Rumors spread. Damage was done. And James says, look, Paul, to help keep peace here, especially with some of these baby Christians and then the non-Christian Jews that are here in this city who are so enthusiastic about that Mosaic covenant and they've heard you're coming. Hey, just to help us keep peace here, we got a request for you. Here's what we want you to do. We're glad you're in our city. We welcome you. This is what we want you to do. We've got 4 Jewish Christians here. They're new baby Christians, and they want to take one of the vows in the Mosaic covenant called the Nazirite vow. You can look it up if you're interested. But basically, you have to shave your head, you have to do get ritually purified, and then there's certain special rules. You're not allowed to drink any wine or alcohol for a certain period of time while you're taking that special vow. And it's kind of a special offering to God. And we got 4 Jews here. They want to take this vow. Here's what you do. Take them into the temple, purify yourself, and then sponsor them. Pay for them to be able to take this vow, and go with them, and then everybody here will know that there's no truth in those rumors, but that you support the Mosaic law and you respect it, and you actually obey the law yourself. Now, side note again, was that totally true? Did Paul always keep the Mosaic law? No. When he was with Gentiles, he lived like Gentiles. When he was with Jewish people, though, he absolutely did keep the law. He did whatever would help people come to Christ and not make anything trip them up, okay, from hearing the gospel. So he didn't actually always keep the Mosaic law, but when he was with Jewish people, he did absolutely keep it. So there's this interesting dynamic. How much did James know when he said that, and how much didn't he know? This is what happened. So anyway, so what would you think, Paul? Is he going to do it? If you were Paul, would you do this request for James and for the Christians there in that city, or would you be like, I'm not doing this vow. We are not under this covenant. We are free in Christ. We don't have to do this kind of stuff. Would you flaunt your freedoms? Or would you do something to help keep peace in the Christian community? Well, Paul decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. And so he took the men, he paid for them to take that vow, to get their head shaved. He walked with them to the temple, went and reported the days and followed all the customs that he was supposed to do. All right? So he did this for them. All right? It cost him money, it cost him time, it cost him energy, but he did it just to keep peace, especially to keep peace among the Christian Jews. And then it all blows up in his face. So when the 7 days were almost over, something happened. All right? And it's all going to go downhill from here. So here's how it went down. So Paul was there, and he'd come with me. I was Greek, and there was a couple other of us Greeks. And we'd been walking around the city, right? And there's a part of the temple that we can go in, even as Greeks. We can go in the outer part of the temple. But then the inner part of the temple is only supposed to be for Jews. Jews and Jews only. And if any non-Jewish person goes in there, there was even an inscription written that he should be killed. All right? But, we didn't go in there. We were walking around with Paul in the city. But then Paul did go in the inner area. And guess who he found there? So you remember those missionary trips and all those parts of Asia he went to? He would always go to the Jewish people first. And then they would always eventually reject him, a lot of them, and get mad at him. So then he would go to Gentile people in the city. And then they'd get really mad. Well, see, it was Pentecost in Jerusalem, which is a special festival. And a lot of people from all over the empire go to Jerusalem for this festival. And guess who happened to be in the temple area and happened to see Paul there? Some of the Jews from some of those cities in Asia. They saw Paul there and they flipped out. They said, and they even saw him, they just flipped out. And they said, basically, guys, there he is. This is the guy we were telling you about. He's here in Jerusalem, the famous guy that's going all over the empire, speaking against the law of Moses, speaking against the temple, trying to destroy our religion. He's here, guys, let's get him. And everybody got stirred up, and they were like, look, he's in the inner temple. He's probably brought Greeks into the Jewish part of the temple. Like, let's get him. Okay, this is going to get real ugly real quick. All right, so they basically stirred up the whole crowd. People were running together. They seized him, and they were like, help us, this is the guy, let's get him. And everybody just started, just grabbed him and dragged him out of the Jewish part of the temple into the outer part, closed the gates behind him, because they're about to lynch mob him right there. And you're not allowed to kill people, maybe they thought, in the holy part of the temple. So they drag him out of the temple, and they just start kicking him, beating him. It basically was just mob mentality all over. You guys remember Lystra? How people are fickle, like a light switch. They could be for you and 1 minute against you. So the rest of the story, guys, is going to go really fast. All right, so hang on tight. Because after 6 peaceful days in Jerusalem, it's all going downhill right now. All right, you ready? It went like this. The people came running from all directions. They grabbed him. They dragged him out of the Jewish part of the temple, shut the gates. Then they started to kill him. They were beating him, kicking him, punching him. Well, news got to the Roman commander who was there on site at the temple, which you saw in the intro video, in the fortress. So he got all his soldiers. They rushed down the stairs. They stormed into the area. When the Jews saw the soldiers, they were like, all right. And they stopped beating Paul. And the soldiers immediately, the Romans arrested Paul. They chained him to 2 soldiers. And the commander stood up and he asked the crowd, all right, what has this guy done that you guys are beating him up like this? And the crowd was shouting all different kinds of stuff. They weren't even agreeing with each other. So the commander was like, just get him out of here. The people were going crazy. They started dragging Paul away. And they're still beating him. The Jews are hitting him, still trying to kill him as the soldiers have him in chains. They're carrying him up. So they actually had to lift him up on their heads, basically like a mosh pit, and carry him up the stairs. So they got him up the stairs. Soldiers are all there. They set Paul down, and Paul's like, hey, just let me, he says to the commander, let me just speak to the crowd. Just give me a chance. He's up on the stairs, all the soldiers around him, and he's like, just give me a chance. Well, the commander looks at him and are you that Egyptian crazy guy that led 4,000 people in a revolt out in the desert a little while back? And Paul looks at him and says, no, I'm Jewish. I'm from the city of Tarsus, which is a respectable city in the empire. So the commander's like, oh, okay. And he gave Paul permission to speak. So the crowd was shouting, away with him, away with him. And Paul started speaking to the crowd. He silenced them a little bit with his hand, but some were still making noise. And then he decided to start speaking in their mother tongue. So Paul switched his language and started talking in the Jewish people's mother tongue, which is Aramaic. And they all got super quiet. All right? And he said to them, brothers and fathers, I'm going to make my defense, so listen to me. I'm a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up right here in this city. And I was trained by Gamaliel. Guys, Gamaliel was like the most respected rabbi in Jerusalem. Everybody knew him. Paul said, hey, he was the guy that trained me. All right, I knew the law. I know the book. I know the Mosaic covenant. And I had just as much zeal for God as you guys do. In fact, I hated Christianity. I harassed people that were in this religion, followers of the way, as it was called, even to the point of killing them. I had them arrested, women and men, and I had some of them even put to death. And the high priest, you can go to the high priest right now and the leading council and ask them if this is true, and they'll tell you it's true. All right? I even chased the Christians down when they fled the city from me and went to other cities. I went into those cities and chased them down. In fact, one day I was chasing them down, and this is what happened to me. If you want to understand my story, this is what happened to me. I was chasing them down to Damascus. I had the letters to arrest them. I was just outside the city, walking into the city, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the day, a bright light started shining. I mean, like super bright, blazing light. I got knocked down. It was so bright, and a voice started speaking, and he said, Paul, why are you harassing me? And I said, who are you? And the voice said, I am Jesus, the one you're harassing. And so I said, what should I do? And the voice said, you go into the city and you'll find out. And I was blind. Instantly, I was blind. All right? So I walked into the city, and a man named Ananias came to see me. He was a Jewish guy, respected by all the Jews, kept the law, all right? Very strongly, he kept the Mosaic law. He stood right beside me, and he said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And instantly my sight came back, all right? And then he said to me, in that city, he said, the God of our fathers has chosen you to know his will, to see the righteous one, and to hear words from his mouth. And now you're going to be his witness to all the people. So now what you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, wash your sin away, calling on his name. That's what Ananias told me. So I came back here to Jerusalem. I was praying at the temple, and then I had a vision. And the Lord spoke to me, and he said, quick, listen to me. Leave this city. Leave Jerusalem, because they're not going to accept your testimony about me. I said, Lord, hey, you know I got a reputation here, because I used to harass people that were following you. In fact, I would even put some of them to death. When Stephen was being killed, I was standing right there. I was kind of in charge. I was guarding their clothes while his blood was literally draining out of his body. Everybody was listening super quietly up to this point. But the next thing, Paul says, the next thing that comes out of his lips is going to trigger them. All right. It was nice while it lasted, having their attention. Paul goes on with his speech. He says, then the Lord told me, go. I'm going to send you, instead of to these people, I'm going to send you to the Gentiles. And when the crowds heard him say that God thought it would be better for him to go to the Gentiles than try to bring it to them because they were too stubborn to listen, they got triggered. And they said, just kill him. He's in custody. The Romans are holding him. Like, just get him off the planet. He's not fit to live. They were shouting, throwing their coats off, flinging dirt into the air. The commander ordered, get him to the barracks. They carried him off. The commander had his clothes stripped off of him and ordered him to be whipped and interrogated him. So they stripped his clothes off. That's what they would do, strip you. And then you have to lean up against this post. And he got out the whip to hit him. And this is what they use, guys. This whip is gnarly. This will rip your skin right off. This is not nothing to mess with. And they raised the whip and they're about to whip him. And Paul was like, by the way, one question. Is it legal to whip a Roman citizen? Then instantly, they almost all had a heart attack. And the guy holding the whip dropped the whip, and the people holding him down with the chain backed away. Guys, if you were a Roman citizen, not everybody in the empire was a citizen. If you were a citizen, you weren't supposed to even be put in chains, let alone whipped, until you had a fair trial. And if anybody did that to you, they could be seriously, seriously punished. And so these guys are all the Romans now are freaking out. Oh, dude, we already put him in chains. We're just about to. They're like, back up. So centurion goes to the commander and be like, hey, that crazy Jewish prisoner, he's claiming he's a Roman citizen. So the commander's kind of freaking out a little too, because he's like, dang, I just ordered him to be whipped. So he goes over to him trying to play nice, and he's like, Paul, is it true that you're a Roman citizen? Paul's like, yeah. And the commander's like, wow, that's interesting, because, I had to pay a lot of money to get my citizenship. And Paul says, yeah, well, I was actually born a citizen. So the commander's like, okay. And then the commander was kind of freaking out a little bit because he could actually be in trouble for this if Paul reported it. So the next day, the Roman commander's like, we're going to do this by the book. We're going to have a trial first, okay? We're not going to put this guy in chains, whip him. We're going to have a fair Roman trial, right? So he got all the Jewish accusers together, all the leaders together. And he had the ruling council. That's the Sanhedrin, all right? He got them all together, and Paul looks straight at him now. This isn't the mob. This is the Jewish leaders, the high council. And he says, my brothers, hey, I fulfilled my duty to God with a clean conscience. And then the high priest standing there had the guy next to Paul smack him in the face. Just smack him in the face. He smacked Paul right then and there. And Paul got triggered a little bit, and he was like, God's going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Which kind of meant somebody who looks good on the outside, but inside he's not. Because you sit here trying to judge me according to the law, and you break the law by having me be smacked in the face? What's up with that? And the guys standing there were like, how dare you say something like that and insult the high priest, God's high priest? And then Paul said, well, I actually didn't know he was the high priest. And you're right, it is written in the law, don't speak evil about a ruler of our people. So it's not looking good for Paul in this trial. But then Paul uses his brain. Jesus told us, be as shrewd as serpents, but as innocent as doves. We can use our brain sometimes to get us out of trouble. Okay. So Paul used a little bit of shrewdness right here with what he did next. Paul knew that on this Jewish ruling council, there were two parties. You guys know what different political parties are? How about in your country, in America, do they have any different political parties? Okay. What's one of the political parties they have? I see some of you guys nodding your head. What's the name of one of the political parties they have in America in 2020? The Democrats. Okay. All right. And what's the name of another party that they've got? Republicans. Okay. So you've got, what was the first one again? Democrats and Republicans. Okay, cool. Weird names. Wonder what that means. But yeah. And now, okay, my question, do they always get along with each other? No. Okay, good. Do they sometimes even argue with each other? Okay, perfect. That's a perfect illustration then. Yeah. So you've got these Democrats and Republicans, and they don't get along. Well, in this council, there was two different parties too. We didn't have Democrats and Republicans, but we had one group called the Pharisees and the other group called the Sadducees. Okay? Now, the Pharisees believed everything in the Old Testament. The Sadducees believed the Old Testament, but not the supernatural stuff. So like miracles, angels, spirits, demons, people rising from the dead, resurrection. We believe that stuff. They just believe you live and then you die. And, we believe the Old Testament. We believe in God, but we just, all the miracle stuff, we don't really believe that. Okay, so sometimes they got in heated arguments about that topic, right? So they're both there in the room. And Paul knows this, and it's not looking good for him so far, the trial. So he uses his brain. He says this. He says, brothers and sisters, I'm a Pharisee. My dad was a Pharisee, and I'm basically on trial because I believe in the resurrection of the dead. And instantly, chaos erupted in the council, and they were arguing with each other. The Pharisees were like, hey, who knows? Maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he did see a vision. Angels can appear to people and give them visions. Sadducees, and the Sadducees are like, let's not even go there. And they were just arguing back and forth. It actually even started to get violent. And so the commander ordered Paul to be taken. Just get the guy back in the barracks. Forget this. And so Paul was put back in the barracks. The next night, God came to Paul, though, and told him, Paul, you be courageous. Take courage. The same way you've spoken about me here in Jerusalem, I'm going to have you speak about me way over in Rome. So Paul had some relief there because that was God telling him, you're going to survive this, and I got another mission for you. All right, final chapter. You ready for it? Final chapter of the madness in Jerusalem, the assassination plot. So the very next morning after this council, 40 of the Jews plotted a conspiracy to assassinate Paul. 40 of them, and they took an oath that they would not eat or drink anything till Paul was dead. Went to the leaders, the Jewish leaders, and they said, all right, we've taken this vow. We're going to kill him. Here's what we do. Go to the Romans. Ask and see if you can get them to just transfer Paul from the Roman prison to the Jewish court, which is on a different part of the town. Just see if you can get them to transfer him so we could do the trial again. And then what we'll do, we'll hide out, and on the road, we'll kill him on his way to the Jewish court. And so it seemed like a good plan. One problem was that by God's providence, Paul's nephew was there in the city celebrating Pentecost as well. And he overheard this group of men talking, and they must not have recognized that was Paul's nephew. He overheard it, and he went to Paul in the Roman prison and told him about it. So Paul goes over and gets the centurion, the guy that's in charge of 100 troops, and he says, hey, this young man's got something to tell you. And he told it to the centurion. And the centurion went to the commander and said, hey, this boy's got something you need to hear. So the commander takes him by the hands and says to the nephew, what is it? And the nephew told him everything he'd overheard. So the commander said, okay, you go back where you came from, and don't you tell anybody you told me this. And instantly, the commander got his centurions together, and he took 2 of them. And he said, I need you to take some troops now. We're going to take 200 heavy infantry, and then I want 200 light infantry and 70 horsemen, 70 cavalry. 470 soldiers, guys. He says, get them together, and you get this guy out of here. Take this Paul guy, ride through the night, and take him to Governor Felix. I don't want anything crazy to happen to him on my watch because he's a Roman citizen, and stuff's getting crazy with these Jews. You get him out of here, and you get him out of here now. 470 soldiers, guys. That's half of his whole cohort there in Jerusalem. So they get on the road right there, and they're traveling to Caesarea. It was 9 o'clock at night. 60-mile journey. The same road Paul and I had just walked 7 days earlier down to Jerusalem. Now Paul's going back, being carried by horsemen, guarded by 470 Roman soldiers. So the whole group rushed him halfway there. They got to Antioch. And then the infantrymen turned back, and the rest of the 70 continued the journey. And so it's just Paul and these 70 Roman horsemen. He's just riding on his way back to Caesarea. It's a lot, right? Kind of a wild week. I told you it was a wild week in Jerusalem. So let's just stop now. Most of the story's done. All right? Let's just take a breath and breathe and wrap this up. All right? It's been a wild, crazy week. You know, a lot can happen in a week. 7 days ago, at the end of the last message, Paul and I were free. We just got done traveling all over the empire. We were free men, and we were just walking on that road from Caesarea down to Jerusalem. It was sunny outside. The wind was blowing. We were free. Okay, we knew bad stuff was going to happen in Jerusalem, but we kept walking. And now, 7 days later, it's dark. It's chilly. It's the middle of the night. Paul's got chains on his hand, and he's riding on horseback. Can you hear it? Can you hear the horse hoof beating? Can you see it? Can you see the breath? The steam coming out of the horse's mouth and the breath in the air. Paul's on one of those horses. But this time he's not free. He's under arrest. He's bouncing up and down, surrounded by a group of Roman soldiers, riding through the night. He's not free anymore. But if you could look at his face and you were honest, you would see that he sure looks like a free man. And in the most important way, Paul was a free man. Jesus was with him when him and I were walking down to Jerusalem 7 days earlier, and Jesus is with him right now as he's riding on the same road back to Caesarea in chains. So as he bounces on that horse in the darkness of the night, he smiles. And if you could get really, really zoomed in on Paul's face, riding there in the dark, you might even hear him humming a tune to himself. Until the storm has ceased, your voice will rise above the seas. I will not fear. You are still God. Here in the waters deep, your hand will always be beneath. I will not fear. You are still God. Paul is under arrest. He's surrounded by 70 soldiers. But Paul is still free because God is still God. Freedom, guys. Freedom, I'm going to wrap up with this. Freedom, listen to me now. Freedom is not having chains on you. You could be free if you're in prison. Freedom is walking in full fellowship with Jesus. Paul was 100% surrendered to Jesus with his life. As we heard last week, he was okay with whatever happened to him in Jerusalem. He was 100% surrendered. All he wanted to do was follow Jesus. Do whatever you want. I just want to obey you and finish this race strong. He was 100% surrendered, which meant he had 100% fellowship with Jesus, which meant he was 100% free, no matter what people threw at him. So my question to you, Christians in the future, are you living in full 100% surrender to Jesus right now? I've been saying it all year long. I'm not writing this account to teach you history. I'm writing this account so you learn your identity and you learn your destiny. So my question for you, let's be honest, are you living right now in full 100% surrender to Jesus? Or you still got hidden sins you're hanging on to? And if you can answer honestly, I am. I'm living in full 100% surrender now to Jesus. If that's you, then Christians in generation number 80, Christians in America, smile. If you're walking in full surrender to Jesus, then no matter what you are going through, no matter how hard, and I don't know what's going on in your city right now, maybe there's some crazy stuff going down, maybe some of your plans are changing for the future, maybe there's things that are on your heart, but if you're walking in full surrender, then no matter what you're going through, you're walking in full fellowship with the High King, so you are free. Next week, Paul's going to stand trial in front of 2 governors and one not quite so high king up there in Caesarea. His life is on the line, but he's still smiling. Don't miss it. This has been chapters 21, 22, and 23 of our story, Acts.